I am 29 years old. My name is Piper. That's all I allowed myself to keep by that particular Thursday morning. 2 words. Piper, 29. No last name, no profession, no future plans. Just the perfect, sterile void that I had been meticulously carving out for myself over the past few years, although my family seemed to think they were the ones who had erased me. My mother, Meredith, always insisted I failed to live in the moment. My father, Dashiell, believed I over-intellectualized emotion. My younger brother, Finn, simply preferred to pretend I didn't exist unless he needed to borrow my car. Their departure was not an accident. I knew they had been planning this Maui trip since summer, booking flights, securing a sprawling ocean view villa, even buying matching straw fedoras. They just forgot to tell me. I found the note pinned under the refrigerator magnet, a pale yellow sticky note, barely holding up under the weight of their profound indifference. Piper, we've gone. Leave the house looked after. See you after Christmas. Don't wait up, and please water the roses. Love, we hope you are okay. M, D, and F. The roses, which I loathed, were a sickly yellow, the color of deceit and betrayal. I stared at the note, reading it twice. Then, with the same cool, clinical efficiency a designer uses to strip a palette down to 0, I realized my freedom. There was no pain in this act of public, silent rejection. There was only finality. They had officially closed the chapter where I was listed as their daughter and sister. I picked up the phone. 11:15 a.m. on Thanksgiving was perfect. All of America was gorging on turkey and arguing politics. All the movers were home, but I knew one who wouldn't be. I dialed the number. Garrett Moving and Transport? On the 3rd ring, a low, gravelly voice answered, the kind that sounded like it had been scraped across too many late nights. Garrett? Yeah? He asked. Hi, this is Piper. I used the name I was given, but from this moment it was my own, reforged. I need something moved. Urgent. Extremely urgent. It's Thanksgiving, ma'am. Nobody's working. I know. My voice was flat, like the surface of a frozen lake. It's not furniture, and I will pay triple, quadruple. A feast of turkey times a banker's bonus. There was a pause. He must have heard not desperation, but something rarer and more magnetic, the cold, hard glint of money wrapped around absolute resolve. What exactly, ma'am? He asked, suspicion lining his tone. 1 item, extremely heavy. It doesn't need to leave the property until Tuesday, but I need your best man here to assess and plan, right now, within the hour. I'll be there, he said, and I heard a click in his voice, as if a safe had just opened. The name's Clayton. Clayton arrived exactly on time. He was tall, with tired eyes and hands that looked capable of relocating a mountain. He didn't look like a standard mover. He looked like a man who had transported his own life too many times and knew that the contents of boxes rarely matched the labels. All right, Clayton surveyed the empty living room, which smelled faintly of uneaten turkey and unspoken resentments. Where's your treasure? The basement. I led him down the creaking wooden steps. The basement was the heart of this house. Dark and cold, it was full of the detritus Meredith and Dashiell had accumulated to fill the void in their own lives. Old skis, broken exercise equipment, 20 years of magazines. But in the center, bolted to the concrete floor, stood the item I needed moved. It wasn't just a safe. It was an old, custom-built cedar wine vault. It was the size of a telephone booth, with a thick oak door and a black cast-iron handle. Ma'am, you said 1 item. This is a room, Clayton laughed, but it was a nervous sound. A room that moves, I corrected. My family built it. They expected to dismantle it, but I don't want it dismantled. I want you to relocate it. Piper, this isn't a shipping container, he laughed, but it was a nervous sound. It's basically a structural part of the foundation. I approached the vault. It was locked with an antique key my mother always wore on a chain, but I was a designer. I knew the real secrets were never kept under lock and key. They were hidden in plain sight. It's not bolted to the wall, as you might think, I said. It's bolted to the floor, and the floor is a floating slab. My father liked to brag that if we lived in California, this thing would survive an earthquake. It weighs at least a ton. Clayton came closer. He ran a hand over the rough, old cedar, his fingers finding a faint seam where the wood met the concrete. Okay, he nodded. Whatever you want me to haul, you want it to disappear without a trace. Why? It's irrelevant to the job, I responded, sidestepping the question. I just need it somewhere else, somewhere remote. Inside, there's nothing of value, just old wine and papers. In reality, there was more. It was the repository of all their false promises, all the stifled words they'd swallowed over 30 years of Thanksgiving dinners. I wanted to move this vault of lies and dump it somewhere they could never find it, or at the very least, I wanted them to feel the exact void they'd left for me. All right, Piper, Clayton pulled out a notepad. This is going to take 4 days of planning, 3 men and heavy gear. We start Tuesday. The next 4 days passed in a state I called perfect desolation. I felt no hunger, no fatigue, only the necessity of efficiency. I was a machine dedicated to the entombment of the past. On Monday morning, I packed my possessions. Everything I owned fit neatly into 4 identical rolling suitcases. I shredded old photographs, tore up every letter, and burned them in the fireplace, watching memories turn to smoke. On Tuesday, Clayton arrived with his crew. Heath, a gentle giant with a kind face, and Silas, a younger guy with headphones glued to his ears, who seemed to experience the world as a very loud playlist. The vault, Clayton pointed to it, we brought 2 hydraulic jacks. We're going to lift it, slide dollies underneath, and inch it out the doorway. Perfect. I sat on a rickety stool watching. You sure you don't want to open it up and take out the contents? That would shed a significant amount of weight. I shook my head. No, it must remain sealed. It's part of my installation. That's exactly what it was. My installation. The expression of myself through a radical shift in environment. The work was slow and agonizing. The sound of metal scraping and wood groaning filled the house. I could hear the house, which had witnessed 30 years of my life, protesting the violation. Heath and Silas worked in silence. Clayton, however, spoke occasionally. I've been a mover for 15 years, he said during a pause while they waited for the jack to slowly lift one corner of the vault. And I've moved a lot of weird things, stuffed bears, collections of glass eyes, even a casket with a body inside. But I've never moved an entire empty room before. You don't know that it's empty, I corrected him. I know what's inside, Piper. Inside is a history you're trying to bury. I looked at him. There was no judgment in his tired eyes, only professional curiosity. My family, I began, and the words snagged in my throat. I had never told anyone. My family, they live in a world where if you don't speak of the problem, it doesn't exist. When I was 10, I broke my arm, and they prescribed forget about it instead of a cast. This vault, it's everything they hid. Their debts, their grudges, their old infidelities. They thought by locking it up they could fly to Maui and start fresh, but they left the key. And you have the key? Clayton asked. No, I smiled. The key is in the lock. They were so confident that I would never touch their sacred shrine, they left it sticking out. By the morning of the 5th day, the vault was fully rolled out of the basement and stood strapped onto the trailer parked in the backyard. It was Wednesday. The weather was grim, the sky threatening snow, as if nature itself was dawning black. Where are we taking it, Piper? Clayton asked as they secured the vault to the flatbed. To the Legacy, on the edge of the city, an abandoned cold storage warehouse I bought yesterday. It has a separate bay that was used for meat storage. Perfect. Clayton nodded, asking no more questions. The Legacy. It was perfect. Cold, dark, and forgotten. I drove ahead in my old Ford, Clayton following with the trailer. We drove through the city, and I could feel my entire past world like old skin shedding itself from me. The warehouse was empty, only the echo of our footsteps and the smell of mold and rust. We parked the trailer in the enormous hangar. All right, boys, Clayton addressed Heath and Silas. This is the last push. We roll it in and close this chapter. The process of winching the vault inside, up a ramp and through a narrow doorway, took another 2 hours. They used pulleys, chains, and a series of muttered curses. Finally, the vault was inside, within the cold storage bay. It stood grim and massive beneath a single dim light bulb, like a vast coffin holding the history of my family. Done? Clayton exhaled heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. What now? Now, I said, rising from the concrete floor, now you get your check and leave. I walked toward the vault. The key, that same antique cast iron key that symbolized their blind faith in my obedience, was still sticking out of the lock. Wait, Clayton said, you're not going to open it. Me? I laughed. For the first time in 5 days, it was a real laugh, clear and merciless. No, that's their job. I walked up to the door, turned the key, pulled it out, and dropped it on the floor. But I am going to do something else. My parents always called this house their fortress, and this vault its citadel. And now I was the saboteur. I pulled a blowtorch and a gas canister from my bag. They were meant for my metalwork projects, one I never finished. Today, it was finished. Piper, what are you doing? Clayton took a step forward. I'm reinforcing their legacy. I started working on the back wall of the vault, where the cedar was oldest and driest. I heated the metal sheeting, then began to slowly, surgically cut through the cedar wood. I wanted to see what was truly behind their false stronghold. First, I saw jars of pickled preserves my mother had made 20 years ago but never ate. Then my father's old financial reports dating back to the late 90s with huge amounts redacted. Then I hit something that wasn't wood or paper. Stop, Heath shouted, his kind face contorted. What is that? It was a small, very old, dust-covered box nailed to the interior of the wall. It wasn't part of the vault. It was part of what was in the house wall before the vault. My parents had simply built their repository around this older secret. I tore the box off the wall. It was made of polished cherry wood and bore an engraving. Nola, 1968. No one in our family was named Nola, and 1968 was long before my parents were married. I set the box on the floor. The blowtorch was still hissing. Clayton, Heath, and Silas stood around, their professionalism evaporated. They were just men witnessing the dissection of a secret. I opened the box. Inside lay a single, perfectly folded baby blanket, pristine. It was old but clean. Beside it was a photograph, a young woman strikingly similar to my mother, but with sad eyes, holding a baby wrapped in that very blanket. And most significantly, there was a letter written in thin, elegant handwriting. I began to read it aloud, my voice shaking not with sentimentality but with a cold fury of comprehension. Meredith, it didn't work. She's too weak. The doctors say she won't survive. We can't. We must do as we agreed and send her away before Dashiell finds out. This is the last time. I can't take any more. Forgive me, my darling Nola. Your sister, Lenore. July 29th, 1968. I looked at Clayton. My mother never mentioned a sister. I had always been the only child. But on the back of the blanket, in tiny, almost indiscernible cursive, was the name. Not my name. It was the name given to that Nola in 1968, the one they sent away because she was too weak. In that moment, we all knew the vault wasn't a repository for their secrets. It was their mausoleum, their memorial to a lost life. My parents had taken the name of that little girl, Sloane, and given it to me, presumably to fill the void. I understood why I was always told not to cry and not to feel, because I wasn't the real Sloane. I was the replacement. I was the living headstone on another child's grave. The silence was deafening. And then Silas, the young man with the headphones who had been standing slightly apart the entire time, made a sound. At first, it was a low, rattling moan. He was staring at the blanket, at the photograph, and then at me. His face was ash, his eyes widening with a terror that wasn't about fear, but about knowing. "No," he whispered. You can't be her. Piper, who hadn't cried when my family left, hadn't cried when I cut open their secret, looked at Silas, at his trembling lips. "I'm Piper. Who are you?" Silas didn't answer. He just began to scream. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of utter, unchecked horror, the sound of a person who had just realized they were part of someone else's dead, forgotten history. He screamed as if he were seeing the ghost whose name I bore. "Lenore!" Silas's scream was sharp as broken glass, echoing through the cold hangar. Clayton and Heath, two strong men, recoiled from him, trying to subdue him. "Clayton, what the hell is wrong with you?" Clayton grabbed his shoulders, but Silas kept screaming, pointing not at me, but at the box. That's Elle." "What Elle?" I asked, my voice still unnaturally composed. I felt no panic, only an incredible, cold, logical dawning. "Lenore," Clayton rasped, holding Silas against the wall to keep him from collapsing. "Silas, he's my son, and Lenore is my mother." I knelt down beside the box. My mother's sister, Lenore. I looked at Clayton. She wrote this letter. She was the one who sent away that Nola in 1968. "No," Clayton shook his head. "No, that's my mother, Lenore. She disappeared in 1970. They said she ran off to Europe and never came back. My grandmother, her mother, always called Lenore irresponsible. But before she left, she told me she had a secret, a very bad secret she couldn't share." Heath, standing in the shadows, walked up to the vault. He began feeling the cut-out section of the wall. "Piper," his voice was low and dangerous. "This isn't just cedar. There's a double wall here. On the other side, there was a door." I picked up the blowtorch again and illuminated the gap. On the far side, hidden behind a layer of cedar cladding and covered in decades of dust, was another, smaller, lower door. It looked like a cellar door that had been walled over. "She wasn't sent away," I whispered. "She was buried in that house, and this vault was built to enshrine not only her, but the secret itself." The name Piper was their tombstone. Silas, my never-known cousin, stopped screaming and started weeping. Clayton, my hired mover who had transported my own sentence, closed his eyes. "My mother, Lenore," Clayton spoke slowly, each word as heavy as a jack. "She had a child, and her sister Meredith. She must have helped her hide it." But I knew what he was going to ask. But why did they take her name and give it to me? I picked up the letter, turned it over, and read the signature one more time. "Your sister, Elle." But the handwriting was not Lenore's. The handwriting was my mother's, Meredith's. "She wrote that letter to make her sister, Lenore, feel the guilt," I said, the final piece locking into place. "Because my mother is a sociopath. She didn't help. She saw her weak sister, Lenore, with an unwanted child. She eliminated Lenore and possibly that Nola to secure her perfect life. She gave me this name so that every time she looked at me, she remembered her crime but felt she controlled it. I was the living reminder, the trophy in her war against reality." I stood up. The cold in the basement, the cold in the warehouse, the cold in my veins. It was all the same. I was Piper. I was the secret. And now I was free. "Call the police, Clayton," I said, handing him the box with the blanket in the letter. "The secrets are cut open." "And you?" he asked. "Me," I finished. "My job." I looked at the walled-up door. I moved my past to where it belonged, oblivion. Now I start my life, anew, and I am going to live. I left the trailer, the keys to the warehouse, and a check for the entire amount we had agreed upon, and I left them my old name, Piper, and the lie it served. I walked out of the warehouse, breathed the freezing air, and for the first time in 29 years, I felt like crying. But I didn't. I had a new life, and it wasn't going to start with tears. I got into my car, My suitcase held only my clothes, my passport, and a new, clean notebook. I changed my name, chose Eden. Eden, a new beginning, paradise. I turned the ignition. In the rearview mirror, I saw Clayton rushing out the warehouse door, phone pressed to his ear. His screams, his son's screams, the screams I heard 5 days later, finally made sense. They were the sound of truth, bursting through decades of silence. I drove west, toward where I knew the sun would rise. My mother, father, and brother were in Maui, halfway across the world in their perfect sunny bubble. When the police arrived at their house, they would find only empty walls and a note on the fridge pinned by me. Meredith, Dashiell, Finn, don't wait up. Don't forget to water your roses. A. Now Eden. I felt neither hatred nor forgiveness, only the emptiness that now belonged to them. I am no longer Piper. I am Eden, and in this moment, 29 years, one empty house, and one terrible scream later, I finally started to live.